Hi, this is Neil Bellon, and this is part 2 of my video presentation on chess psychology, continuing the game uh, between myself and International Master Jay Bonin. And we left off with this position, with white to move. And I just want to go back. As I was finishing the first part, I realized I left something out regarding tactics that's kind of instructive. Let me just go back. When we had this position and I took here, and then queen takes d6, okay, I was actually looking at rook d1 here, which seems like, a logical move attacking the queen. But do you see why it doesn't work? Okay, it's because of tactics. If I do this, okay, do you see what he has? Right? Check this out. Bam. Right? He takes. Okay? Do you see that? And then if the queen takes, right, he gets it back and he's up a rook. Do you see that? So, you always have to be careful. Okay? I'm just going to go back again. So, rook takes d6, queen takes. And again, if I do what seems like an obvious move, because of this knight. See, knights, as I said, in the video on tactics, knights are very nasty when they're near your opponent's king. He has this shot, and again, I really can't take back with the queen. That probably wouldn't be best. I would maybe have to do something like this here, but at any rate, it would be losing either way. So you really do need to watch out. Because again, if rook d1 he takes, and then if I take, he has that, and he's winning. Okay, so you always have to be careful. So I did king g1 instead of rook d1. Okay, so let's move on. He put his rook on the file behind the queen, and then I did bishop b3. Okay, and my thinking was, I could follow it up with queen c4 and, get a mate threat. I thought it was a good idea. He did queen f6. Okay. And then I challenged on the file. He took, and then I took. And then, as you'll notice now, he has a weak back rank. We also mentioned that on one of the earlier videos. Right now it's protected from the queen, but if he wants to move his queen, he has to deal with that. So he did g5, giving his king some space, or Luft as they call that. I believe that's the the German word for air. Giving the king space, while making an aggressive pawn move. So he did that, and here I played what's probably the best move, queen d5. Very aggressive. It's attacking f7, it's hitting b7, it's in the middle. It's just a great square for the queen. And right now white is probably a little bit better. His piece activity is excellent. It really is. And I remember during the game I was pretty happy with my position, but I needed to be careful. I didn't want to get overconfident. I was playing an IM. But I had achieved my goal, which was I didn't want it to be a situation where he was going to blow me off the board with a quick win. So at this point I was saying, what, regardless of what happens, he's going to go home and say, yeah, he played a good game against me. So at any rate, he went bishop g6. And honestly, I'm not sure if that's best, but he's protecting, and then I'm looking, did I miss something? I took the free pawn. Why not? So I'm up a pawn now. He did king g7, and then I did bishop c4, even though bishop d5 may be a little stronger, attacking the knight twice, but I did bishop c4. Okay, and then he did h5. He's going all out for a kingside attack. Then I did bishop d5. Okay, he did knight d6, and then here I did queen c7. okay, because my queen's being attacked. Then he did g4. Okay, I took here, he took back, and then what I had missed, and Jay was kind enough to kind of go over the game with me after. And it's funny because, truth be told, I was looking at this move, but for some reason I just couldn't pull the trigger. It just seems very muddy at the time. I mean, you got to remember, we're on move 30, and I'm playing an IM, and this was like on a Friday evening at the end of a work week. So, I was getting a little tired here. I didn't want things to get too crazy, but I was looking at knight g5 for a while, and like something was telling me, that's the move, but I couldn't pull the trigger. Because knight g5, and then, I mean, that's just a great move. I'm hitting here, if he takes, I take, and it's a whole thing. But anyway, this could play out maybe, like that, and then, knight e6 check, something like that. But I did knight d2, which is fine. It's more drawish. I mean, that's not a bad move, but I could have had the advantage with knight g5, but I'm still doing okay. He then took the pawn there. So I gave the pawn back. I took his knight. He takes mine. And then we're now coming up to the end of the game. Queen e5 check. And then it's a dead draw. It's pretty much drawn, and I saw that because no matter how he gets out of the check, it's either drawn or white has an advantage. Simply because I have him in check and my pieces are very aggressively placed. And he did king h7, and I saw that I could just keep checking. So I did queen h2, and I looked Jay right in the eye, this title player, and I said, very polite, I said, Jay, I offer a draw. And he looked at it, he goes, yeah. He goes, you got it. And so this was a draw I had as a class player against an IM, and Jay was, he was very gracious, and like I said, we went over the game after, and normally you wouldn't offer rather a draw to a much higher rated player. I am one of those people. I think that unless it's really a truly dead draw. I really don't like to offer draws to higher rated players unless it's like what they call a book draw. But in this case, he saw that in order to get out of the checks, he would either be worse or it would be a perpetual. And so he accepted the draw. He was, and, I just remember leading up to this, it was getting a little tense because, people were starting to gather around. Like, everyone thought that I would, he was going to wipe me off the board in, a half hour. So, a lot of people were staring over my shoulder. So it was very nerve-wracking playing like the last 10 moves. And, this is just, it's a memorable game. And the reason I'm doing it and showing this to you is the psychological outlook that I had by not being intimidated and just having confidence is really what led me to draw, at the time, such a higher rated player. I mean, he was, I think, like almost 2,400 at the time as an IM. So, because if he goes, king, g8, I can just, check there and, back and forth. So, there's really nothing he can do. So once it was queen e5 check, it was really drawn. And, you saw throughout this game some of the tactical ideas, some of the positional ideas, the psychological ideas, not being intimidated by your opponent, sticking with your own plans. I showed you that tactical threat earlier. If I had attacked his queen with my rook, he would have won a rook. Very, very easy to slip up. And, as I said in the Psychology Part 1 video, this is really a culmination of everything I talked about. And, when I look at a student's game as a coach, I'll look for, areas where I think maybe, okay, you got nervous here and you didn't need to, that type of thing, because, psychology is, very important. I hope you found this helpful, and be sure to check out my other videos on my approach to teaching chess. Thank you.